This is one of my favorite features of this group because we dropped it for several years, but then when I was on the board for 4 years ago or something like that, I suggested, starting it again, and the group agreed. And it's a way for us to appreciate each other's writing because for 10 or 15 minutes, today's guest is going to give us a reading from her first novel, I believe it is, right? Yeah, okay. And pick up a sense of, what they've accomplished. And she's got some books in the back if you're interested later on. Her name's Pam Lewis, and she sent me her bio. I'm going to read it in a second. But it strikes me that she lived a life very much as so many of us members lived. Not really embroiled in writing, but finding inroads to get into it. Our Mold Queen, having one of the biggest texts on the subject of mold in the United States, right?
In the real estate industry.
In the real estate industry? Okay, that's not bad. We've got former fighter pilots like Jim. Yeah. We've got a whole bunch of people, teachers, former lawyers, former doctors, nurses, and Pam had a varied life also. Most of us are looking for national and local recognition. We're jacks of all trades, masters of few, but I have it on good evidence that Larry Greenlee is about yay close to the Pulitzer. So there are members among us who are, stronger in some areas than others. Pam Lewis moved to Albuquerque from a small Connecticut town in 2014 after a long and varied career that included a welcome wagon lady, a computer programmer, a swimming instructor, and a corporate marketing writer. Throughout all this, and for years, she wrote fiction, rising early in the morning when she was freshest and most inspired, and finally had success in 1994 when the story, raise your hand if this sounds like something you'd like to do, You Are Here was accepted by a little magazine called The New Yorker. Yeah. She's also the author of 3 novels, Speak Softly, She Can Hear, Perfect Family, and A Young Wife from Simon & Schuster. Her short fiction has appeared in various literary journals, and her nonfiction account of a trip to Antarctica following the death of her husband in 1902 appeared in Red Book. 2012. appeared in Red Book in 2014. Please help me welcome, putting your hands together, to Pam Lewis, who's going to read for her first novel. Sorry about that. You're welcome.
Well, hello, everybody.
Hi, Pam.
I'm going to read just the opening 5 or 6 pages from my first novel, which is called Speak Softly, She Can Hear. Is this, are you? Yeah. I think so. Is that good?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, good. And I think all of you need to know before I start reading is that it happens in 1965. So if there are references that you don't understand, that might explain it. March 28, 1965. It was pitch black, black above and below. The only way to know up from down was by the pinprick stars. Ahead, the sounds of Eddie Lindbeck's boots fell heavily in the snow, his full weight coming down and then pushing off. Carol's footsteps were quieter because she'd worn her new Capezio flats to make her feet look pretty and to impress him. Capezio flats, black stretch pants with the loop under the arches to keep them from riding up, Naomi's gold mohair sweater, and her Aunt Emily's brown parka with the cream V. She couldn't help the jacket. It was all she could scrounge up in the warmth department. But now her feet were numb. She had to come down hard on her heels to get any traction at all, and it made her feel foolish. She had the sinking feeling he'd forgotten she was even here. If anything, he was getting farther ahead. When he picked her up at the double hearth, he'd been aloof, not at all like he was on the train. A car passed them, whipping their shadows together. Afterward, it was even blacker than before. "Is it much farther?" she called to him. The sound of his boots stopped somewhere up ahead. "Is she tired?" "No," she said, "she isn't. She's just cold." She wouldn't want him to send her back to the double hearth and ask for Naomi tonight instead. She'd won going first, and she was going through with this, no matter what. "It's not far," he said. "It's something out of Cannery Row. You girls didn't exactly go all out, did you?" "Well, you're the one who made the reservations." Another car beamed from behind them, and she saw the sign up ahead, Snowtown Motel. She knew exactly how far it was now because it was where the taxi had dropped him off after the train today. After the turn, the driveway snaked through a forest and then ended up at a clearing and a bunch of cabins, a big ring of them with an office off to the left. Maybe it was crummy, but she wasn't going to take the blame for it. He was the one who'd supposedly been here before. "You didn't give me much to work with," he said. When she caught up, he put an arm around her shoulders and breathed into her ear. "No matter." The sound of his words triggered a spreading warmth, followed by a tight cluster of sensation, as though a string were being tugged deliciously somewhere deep within her. Naomi said the whole world is divided between those who have done it and those who haven't, and men can tell. "I couldn't believe what you did this morning," she said. Carol and her mother had arrived at Grand Central Station early and had had to wait near the information booth where the floor was disgusting. Carol had Aunt Emily's skis and was wearing Aunt Emily's urine-colored stretch pants. In her suitcase, she had Aunt Emily's long underwear and a hat she wasn't going to be caught dead in. She'd never carried skis before, and she kept hitting people with them by accident. When she set them down, they slithered every which way. Her mother kept trying to kick all the equipment into a tidy pile. Carol had felt a little bad that her mother had gone to all the trouble of getting the skis from Emily when Carol didn't really care about skiing. They'd had to get the car out of the garage and drive up to Tarrytown. Emily had taken the bindings to be oiled or something and had had the sides sharpened, and it was all a very big production. She'd shown Carol and her mother those old pictures from 100 years ago when she had been, in her words, a big girl too, before she dieted herself into oblivion. Back then, you had to walk up and ski down. Emily said that 100 times. Now they had chairlifts. Emily thought walking up made her superior. Emily was always saying things like that. So Carol and her mother had been standing there waiting when they heard a voice bellowing out across the whole station, "You guys!" And there was Naomi with Eddie right next to her on that giant marble landing that looked out over all of Grand Central Station. Carol had frozen on the spot. What did Naomi think she was doing? She had on all black and one of those serape things her father and Elaine were always bringing her back from South America, a sort of shawl in bright red. The odd couple, Carol thought. Eddie had looked preppy in his gray Shetland sweater and tweed jacket. He had blandly handsome features, a Scandinavian face, wide, high cheekbones, narrow, dark blue eyes, and a full mouth. His lank hair was the color of sand. Naomi's eyes were thick with coal, something she just started doing. Carol counted. 1 1,000, 2 1,000, 3 1,000. She knew exactly what was coming. On 4 1,000, her mother leaned over and said, "Isn't it a shame what Naomi does to herself? She could be such a pretty girl." Naomi and Eddie came barging through the crowd toward Carol and her mother, Naomi in the lead, Eddie following, carrying both the suitcases. Naomi pretended not to know his name. She called him "this nice man" and said he'd been kind enough to share his taxi, that if he hadn't, she'd have missed the train for sure. Eddie grinned shyly as though embarrassed at all the fuss, as if, aw shucks, all he'd really done was what any decent person would do. Carol had held her breath in desperate, paralyzing fear that any minute now her mother would catch on and Carol would be in the biggest trouble of her young life. But her mother hadn't a clue. She believed what Naomi said, and had shaken Eddie's hand, her manner the same as when she met Carol's father's business associates, over chatty and nervous. What a nice thing it was for you to do. People in the city don't usually, now where I'm from, on and on, blushing and squirming in her coat like a complete idiot. She was 40, for God's sake, and Eddie was 26. It killed Carol the way her mother could get, especially when she was the one going to bed with him later. It was so pathetic. She hadn't dared to look at Naomi, who she knew would be smirking dangerously. "The nerve of you," she said to Naomi when they finally ditched her mother and got on the train, "the absolute balls." They managed to get 2 pairs of seats facing each other and throw their stuff over the other 2. Then they'd had to fight people off who wanted to sit with them, saying the seats were taken. Naomi was good at that, coolly and calmly putting her hand on the vacant seat and saying, "I'm afraid these are already spoken for," ignoring people's dirty looks once the train got going and the seats stayed empty. If it had been up to Carol, she would have given them away. She was weak when it came to things like that. Somewhere in Connecticut, Eddie made his way up the aisle and flopped down in the seat next to Carol. He leaned against her and she let him, feeling his warmth. But that was nothing. The next thing she knew, Naomi, who was sitting opposite Eddie, slipped her stocking foot between Eddie's big boots, inched it up in front of the seat between his knees, and rested it right between his thighs, wriggling her toes and laughing. Where had she learned to do that? He made a kissing motion at Naomi and then at Carol, and Carol dared to make the same noise back. And after that, anything went. Whatever they felt like doing, they did. Whatever they felt like saying, they said. What a feeling that was. Think it, do it. For mile after mile of swaying tracks and stops and people getting on and off, staring at them, some of them making remarks, the girls switched places, took off their shoes and socks, touched his feet, each other's feet and ankles, until sometime in the afternoon they all fell into a semi-sleep, tangled and barefooted. "So I'll see one of you later," Eddie said as the train was pulling into the Waterbury station. Me, Carol was drunk with him. Eddie had bedroom eyes, half shut all the time, with fat lids and thick lips. His whole face reminded Carol of sleep, like you'd have to stick a pin to him to get his attention. So sexy, she thought. "We had a race and she won," Naomi said. "You did?" Eddie said, waking up, a little confused. "You mean a foot race?" "Sort of," Carol said. Eddie's expression bothered her, and she didn't feel like giving him the details. It had been her idea, and now it seemed sort of dumb, and she was embarrassed. She and Naomi had chosen a course. Naomi would start at 100th and Madison, while Naomi started at 20th and Madison, and whoever got to 60th and Madison first, the exact midpoint, won the right to go first with Eddie. Carol had won by 6 minutes. "You must have cheated, eh?" Eddie pressed 2 fingers into Carol's belly. She knew what he was thinking, that she was too fat to outrun Naomi, but she'd only had to outwit her. She'd zigzagged through the city, plunged into traffic mid-block, and raced through red lights. She counted on Naomi getting distracted by stores and people, and she had. "No," she said. "Well, lucky me," Eddie said. In the headlights of an oncoming car, she saw him ahead now, getting ready to cross the road to the motel. He waited for the car to pass and then ran for it. She wished he'd wait for her, but maybe it was because he was an actor that he was this way. Maybe he was going over lines in his head or thinking about how to do a scene. She'd read in Confidential magazine that Danny Kaye did that all the time. People would see him on airplanes and ask for his autograph, and he wouldn't even hear them because he was so preoccupied with a script. He waited for her to cross the road. She couldn't see him very well and had to grope for him in the dark. Her hands hit the soft layers of his jacket. "Hold still," he said. His gloved hands came to rest on her arm, and she smiled secretly. He tucked her hand under his elbow and pressed it hard against her side. "Come on," he said. "It's fucking cold out here." Oh, the word thrilled her. She'd never heard it spoken like that, so casually, as if he said it all the time. He set off fast, but she couldn't keep up, and soon her hand slipped away from his arm. He took a few steps without her and then stopped. Utter silence. She could be anywhere with anybody. It was that dark. She was too scared to take one more step by herself. "Eddie?" She groped the dark again. "Come on, this isn't funny." He grabbed her from behind and she screamed. He clamped a leather glove that smelled like gasoline over her mouth. Shh, he said, and kissed her, the warmth of his lips and tongue, a sudden shock more terrifying still. Come on, not much farther. By now she could see a little bit of light coming through the trees ahead. She had her hand tucked in between his elbow and his side, and she was a little behind him. She liked it this way, the feeling of being taken somewhere, against her will, but not really. He led the way to the second cabin from the left. The ones to either side were dark, and the office was dark except for a neon sign with pieces of the letters missing. The cabin was dark wood, or painted brown, she couldn't tell. It had white shutters tilting off. She knew what he meant about it being crummy. Ours is only a dorm, she said about the double hearth, where she and Naomi were staying. At least you have some privacy. He fumbled in his pocket for the key, opened the door, and switched on the light. See what I mean? It smelled of bats and mice inside, like a summer house that had been closed up. There were 2 twin beds with beige and brown striped bedspread, an armchair, and a bureau. His suitcase lay open on the floor. It was one of those fiberglass ones that you could drop from an airplane and it wouldn't break. His shaving stuff was spread out on a fake mantle. There was an electric heater. He switched on the heater, and they both watched the coils start to glow red. He went to one of the beds, jiggled the mattress, and grinned. He sat on the bed, took off his parka and sweater, and threw them into the corner. He started undoing the top button of his shirt and then stopped. Don't just stand there, he said.